First of all, what is a pit? Why is everybody in a pit? Why is it happening in Chicago? Why isn't it in New York City or LA? And what was actually happening in that pit?
Okay, so pits were literally, the first pits were octagon-shaped pits where it's a series of steps higher and higher, and they would trade grains in those pits because that's really what Chicago was all about back when. It was trading grains, wheat, corn, oats in the pits, then live cattle, and that was over at the Merc, pork bellies over at the Merc. They had prejudice against each other too, so Board of Trade was mainly Irish. So if you were Armenian like me, or Italian or Jewish, it was really hard for you to get onto the Board of Trade. They have a book that goes back to Abraham Lincoln's days, literally into the 1860s, where it's about that thick, and every page of that book, 2 people had to sign for Brian Rose to be a member. The 2 people had to recognize that you were an honest guy and that you would adhere to their rules, and they had to nominate you, just like in a country club, to be a member, and they had to sign their names in that book alongside your name. And so it was very hard to be a member back then, so the Merc sprung up across town. Same idea though, those same octagon-shaped pits, and all these guys would stand in there and shout, buy, sold, as far as for levels of buying pork bellies, live cattle, corn, whatever it might be. And every once in a while, Brian, somebody back in the day would come running onto the floor with a raincoat on, and they'd have their clerk hit them with a bucket of water, and they'd come and running onto the floor in the midst of a drought. And everybody knew it was a drought, and so the price of corn spikes. Why? There's going to be less of it because of the drought. And all of a sudden you see a guy running on soaking wet, and he's selling everything. You think it's raining out there, even though we don't grow corn on LaSalle Street. Nonetheless, you'd be shocked and you'd say, sold, 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 sold. And then he's trying to buy them all back. Well, now they have big jumbotrons on all the ends of the floor, so you know exactly, what the weather pattern is in Brazil.
But back then, they could spoof the market and play games and things like that.
Yep, but that's it. Those pits were where all of the firms could meet in one place to set prices for corn, for soybeans, for gold, and they could basically meet there and bids and offers, and that's the fairest way to decide what the price should be, would be all these multiple hundreds and hundreds of guys, and women in some cases. Like I say, women are great traders, but they generally aren't on the floor, they're upstairs.
Right.
But it's not that they can't be on the floor, it's just these days, sadly, instead of 6,000 traders in Chicago, now there's about 300 or 400.
Right. And so Chicago was the center because it was basically all the commerce in America is coming there through railroads and everything. So it was the place to trade, these massive markets. And then later, they adopted bond futures and all these financial instruments because they had the know-how, the liquidity of trading. They had all the people there. So they started trading instruments that had nothing to do with Chicago, really. I mean, the bond markets were probably originally New York or Washington, D.C., and now they had futures on everything.
Yep.
And it was the spot. And I remember in 1993, I went from MIT to Bankers Trust in New York City. I got on the floor. They gave me a big phone with a bunch of buttons, and they're like, this is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, this is Chicago Board of Trade, go. And I called up, I think a guy named Dan Sullivan at Bankers Trust Futures, and he would be down there, and I could hear everyone yelling in the background. And I'd be like, Dan, where are the front 4 contracts? And he'd be yelling at guys, hey, come on, come on. And he would be signaling in to the pit, and the guys deep in the pit would know where the inside market was, and they would signal to the guys outside the pit. They would go to the phones and to me, a trader in New York, and I would be buying and selling because that was the inside market. And that was the information on where the real price was. And this is the old school way that trading was happening in the 90s, right?
Right. And
in the 80s.
Where you're so right, of course you're right, but where you're so right is in futures, which you're talking about with bonds and T-bills and so forth, only the last price goes on the tape, the last traded price. So what if somebody is willing to sell them at a lower price, but they haven't traded yet? The last price is still, for instance, 16. But what if they're offered at 14? The guy's out there, at 14, at 14, at 14, and nobody's buying them. That's vital information to you in New York or anybody trading, but the last price they see is 16 going across the tape. So, if that guy then is selling for you or anybody else and he's going at 13, at 13, at 12, at 12, and they're pushing out these prices and no response, the last traded price is still 16. So now you'd know that on the phone and you're going, well, where's the bid? And the guy's looking out there, with two phones like this, and he's looking at, where's the bid? Where's the bid? And the guy goes, 10, it's at 10. And he goes, sell them down to 10, or whatever. But otherwise, you're just going to focus on the last traded price and you miss everything that trades in between.
Yeah, you'll have the wrong information.
Yep.
And that's why a great broker, and I later became a credit derivatives broker in the over-the-counter markets, a great broker gives you the exact information you need that can make or lose you millions of dollars.
Sure.
And so if you've got the guys on the inside that can get you the info, that's why it was such an important piece to have that information and those market makers down there.
Huge.
And later when I moved to Chicago, I used to go down, and I was being covered by a guy at Solomon Brothers, down to the Board of Trade. I took my mom down there, and to go into the bond future pit, which is probably the most liquid instrument at the Chicago Board of Trade, and there were 300 guys, 400 guys in there. It was mayhem. And everyone's probably shocked by listening to John scream and yell, but that's what's going on down there. And guys are doing the, 2, 3, there, and they're yelling. They're
20, 25.
Yeah, and then
30, 35.
All these hand signals so you can communicate, because there's no cell phones. Nothing was electronic back then. Guys are literally buying and selling. They're writing contracts with each other. The whole world is on phone lines, surrounded with everyone around outside of the pits. They're signaling into people. They're telling the counterparties' names. I used to work at Bankers Trust, and they would move the tie like this. This meant Bankers Trust. It was a banker, and everyone had little code signals of who's buying what.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Bear Stearns.
Bear Stearns. That's what it is.
With the claws. Yeah.
Right. And so this was kind of the good old days when you went down there, and that's where commerce took place, right?
Yep.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real, and I've just sat down with JON NAJARIan, legendary options trader, Hall of Famer, and TV celebrity. You might know him as host of CNBC's Halftime Report, or from his books, How I Trade Options and The 22 Rules of Investing.
I think there's just so much information in options that isn't available in stock. I think it's all about leverage and defining your risk. And if you can do those two things, I think you can be in this game a long time and make money.
Well, in just a few days, John will finally reveal what made him a legendary options trader. In a private broadcast that won't be available on YouTube or anywhere public, he'll show an exclusive group of people how he's been using special infrastructure that's only available to institutional investors. Something that allows him to get a critical piece of information directly from the market exchanges. Information that can tip you off about big market moves a few days before they happen.
We built this algorithm that looked for unusual trading patterns in the market. Once you find those patterns, then it makes it a lot easier to coattail on the smart money.
Now, as a former Wall Street banker myself, I am super excited to share this investment strategy for the very first time. As the host of this episode, I'm able to offer you exclusive rights to a seat at his free training. But you must act now to secure your place. So click on the link below or go to londonreal.tv/options to lock in your spot. And I will see you there.